You don't lack time. You waste focus.
The moment you realize your focus is broken is the moment you begin to suffer, not because the world has suddenly become chaotic, but because your mind has quietly surrendered control. You wake up with plans, intentions, a sense of direction, and yet by the end of the day you feel scattered, exhausted, strangely empty. This is not an accident. The Stoics understood this condition long before notifications, screens, and endless noise. They knew that a distracted mind is a conquered mind, and that discipline is not a harsh restriction but an act of self-respect. Today, as you listen, you are not here to collect ideas. You are here to rebuild command over yourself. The first truth you must face is uncomfortable but liberating. Your focus is not stolen from you, you give it away. Every time you react without thinking, every time you chase what feels urgent instead of what is meaningful, you hand over authority of your inner world. Marcus Aurelius warned that if you are distressed by anything external, the pain is not due to the thing itself, but to your judgment about it. Focus collapses the moment judgment becomes automatic. When you allow every message, every opinion, every irritation to pull at you, you are no longer living by choice, but by reflex. The Stoic does not wage war against the world, he withdraws permission for the world to command his attention. Consider how often your mind leaves the present moment. It rushes forward into imagined futures or loops endlessly through past mistakes. The Stoics saw this clearly. They taught that the only place discipline can exist is now. You cannot control tomorrow, and you cannot repair yesterday, but you can decide what deserves your attention in this breath, in this step, in this task. Focus is not intensity, it is loyalty. Loyalty to the task in front of you, to the role you are meant to play in this moment. When you scatter your attention, you betray yourself in small ways that accumulate into a life of half-finished efforts. There is a reason Stoic writings return again and again to the idea of ruling the inner citadel. Your mind is that citadel. If its gates are always open, anyone can walk in. Insults, distractions, temptations, anxieties, they enter unchallenged. Discipline begins the moment you start guarding what enters your thoughts. This is not suppression. It is selection. Epictetus taught that some things are up to us and some things are not. Your focus belongs entirely in the first category. When you treat it casually, you tell yourself that your time, your energy, your life force are cheap. When you guard it, you send a different message, that your inner life has order, and order creates strength. Modern life trains you to believe that focus is about doing more, faster, louder. Stoicism rejects this illusion. Focus is about subtraction. It is about removing what is unnecessary until only what matters remains. The disciplined mind does not ask, "What can I add to my day?" It asks, "What deserves to stay?" This is why Stoics practiced voluntary discomfort, silence, and simplicity. Not to punish themselves, but to sharpen perception. When noise is reduced, clarity emerges. When excess is removed, purpose becomes visible. You may feel resistance to this idea because part of you enjoys distraction. The Stoics were honest about this. They knew that the undisciplined mind seeks comfort, novelty, and escape. But they also knew that this path leads to weakness disguised as pleasure. True focus requires the courage to be bored, to sit with difficulty, to remain with a task even when the mind begs for relief. This is where discipline is forged, not in grand moments, but in the quiet decision to stay. Understand this clearly. Focus is not a personality trait. It is a practice. The Stoics did not believe in waiting to feel motivated. They acted according to principle, not mood. When you wait until you feel focused, you place your life under the control of fluctuating emotions. When you decide to act with focus regardless of feeling, you reclaim sovereignty. Discipline is doing what needs to be done even when the mind resists, especially when it resists. That resistance is not a signal to stop. It is the training ground. There is also a moral dimension to focus that is often ignored. When you are unfocused, you are unreliable to yourself and to others. The Stoics believed that excellence of character included reliability, steadiness, and presence. When you give your attention fully to a conversation, to your work, to your responsibilities, you honor them. When your mind is elsewhere, you diminish them. Focus is respect made visible. You may think the problem is that life demands too much from you. The Stoics would answer that the problem is not demand, but lack of hierarchy. Everything feels important when nothing has been clearly chosen as essential. Discipline begins with choice. Choice clarifies focus. Focus strengthens discipline. This is a cycle, and it can work for you or against you. Today, you decide which direction it turns. As this part comes to a close, reflect on this without judgment. Where has your attention been leaking? Not in dramatic failures, but in small, repeated moments. The Stoics believed that self-awareness is the foundation of self-mastery. You cannot command what you refuse to observe. In the next part, we will move deeper into how judgments fracture focus and how reclaiming control over your inner dialogue begins the rebuilding of discipline. For now, remember this single truth and let it settle. Nothing in your life changes until you decide that your attention is worth protecting. If part 1 revealed where your focus leaks away, part 2 demands that you confront the mechanism behind that loss. Focus is not broken by events themselves. It is fractured by the meanings you attach to them. The Stoics understood this with unsettling clarity. They observed that two people can face the same circumstance and emerge with completely different inner states. One becomes agitated, scattered, and reactive. The other remains composed and deliberate. The difference is not intelligence or talent. It is judgment. And judgment, once examined, can be disciplined. From the moment you wake, your mind begins interpreting. A message feels disrespectful. A delay feels like an obstacle. A task feels heavy. These are not facts. They are conclusions your mind draws automatically, often without your consent. Marcus Aurelius wrote that the soul becomes dyed with the color of its thoughts. When your thoughts are impulsive and emotional, your focus dissolves into reaction. When your thoughts are deliberate, your focus consolidates into strength. Discipline, at its core, is the refusal to accept every thought as truth. Notice how quickly a single interpretation can hijack your attention. One comment lingers for hours. One inconvenience derails your entire day. This is not because the event was powerful, but because your mind granted it power. The Stoics trained themselves to pause between stimulus and response, to insert reason where habit once ruled. This pause is not passive. It is active restraint. It is the moment you ask yourself, is this within my control? If it is not, your focus has no business lingering there. Focus collapses when you argue with reality. You wish people were different. You wish circumstances were easier. You wish the world adjusted itself to your preferences. The Stoics called this a form of madness, not as an insult, but as a diagnosis. To demand that reality conform to your desires is to guarantee frustration. When your mind fights what is, it has no energy left for what can be done. Discipline restores focus by ending this inner conflict. It teaches acceptance without passivity, clarity without bitterness. You may misunderstand acceptance as weakness. The Stoics saw it as precision. When you accept what you cannot change, your attention is freed to act where you can. This is how focus multiplies. Instead of being scattered across endless internal arguments, your mind becomes aligned with action. Consider how exhausting it is to replay conversations, to imagine alternative outcomes, to nurse grievances. None of this improves your life. It only drains your attention. The disciplined mind cuts these loops short, not by force, but by understanding their futility. There is another subtle enemy of focus hidden within judgment, comparison. The Stoics warned against measuring yourself against others because it places your sense of worth outside your control. When you compare, your attention shifts from your own effort to someone else's outcome. This fractures discipline. You begin chasing approval, validation, superiority. Focus cannot survive in this environment. It requires inward orientation. It requires a commitment to your own standards, not borrowed ones. Ask yourself honestly how often your mind is occupied with things that add nothing to your character. News you cannot act on. Opinions that do not guide your conduct. Conflicts that will not matter in a year. The Stoics would call this misuse of attention. They believed time was your most precious possession because it is the substance of your life. To spend it carelessly is not merely inefficient, it is irresponsible. Discipline is the ethics of attention. At this stage, you may feel the urge to control your thoughts aggressively, to silence them, to force focus. The Stoics would caution you here. Force creates resistance. Instead, they practiced observation. When a thought arises, you examine it like a witness, not a prisoner. Is it useful? Is it true? Is it within your control? If it fails these tests, you let it pass without attachment. Over time, this weakens the mind's habit of fixation. Focus becomes natural, not strained. Understand that your inner dialogue shapes your outer behavior. When your thoughts are chaotic, your actions follow. When your thoughts are ordered, your actions align. This is why Stoic discipline begins internally. You do not become focused by rearranging your environment alone, though that can help. You become focused by training your interpretation. When your mind stops exaggerating, dramatizing, and personalizing everything, it regains stability. Stability is the soil in which deep focus grows. There will be moments when emotion surges before reason arrives. The Stoics did not deny this. They were human. What mattered was what came next. Did they indulge the emotion, or did they reclaim authorship of their response? Focus is rebuilt in these moments. Each time you choose not to follow a destructive judgment, you strengthen the muscle of discipline. This is slow work, but it is permanent work. As we move forward, carry this understanding with you. Your focus is not at the mercy of circumstances, but at the mercy of your interpretation. When you learn to discipline judgment, you no longer live at the surface of life, tossed by every wave. You begin to operate from depth. In the next part, we will explore how identity and role clarity sharpen focus even further, and why knowing who you are meant to be in each moment eliminates inner conflict before it begins. Focus begins to stabilize when judgment is disciplined, but it becomes powerful when identity is clarified. The Stoics understood that a confused sense of self leads to scattered effort. When you do not know who you are meant to be in a given moment, your attention fractures. You hesitate, you second-guess, you drift. Marcus Aurelius reminded himself daily that he was a human being, a citizen, a leader, a student of reason. Each role carried expectations. Focus, for the Stoic, was not abstract concentration. It was devotion to one's role here and now. Modern life blurs identity. In a single hour, you are pulled into dozens of roles without transition. Worker, consumer, entertainer, critic, observer. This constant shifting erodes focus because the mind has no anchor. The Stoics countered this by asking a simple, grounding question: what is my role in this moment? When you answer that honestly, distraction loses its grip. If your role is to listen, then listening becomes your entire task. If your role is to work, then work deserves full presence. Focus is loyalty to the role you have chosen, not the one imposed by impulse. Many people believe their lack of focus comes from laziness. The Stoics would disagree. More often it comes from inner conflict. Part of you wants to act, another part wants comfort, another seeks approval, another fears failure. These internal factions compete for attention. Discipline is not the elimination of desire, it is the alignment of desire with reason. When your identity is clear, this alignment becomes possible. You no longer ask, what do I feel like doing? You ask, what does my role require? There is a quiet dignity in this way of living. It removes drama from decision-making. You stop negotiating with yourself endlessly. The Stoics believed that hesitation is a form of weakness, not because caution is wrong, but because chronic indecision wastes life. Focus strengthens when decisions are guided by principle rather than emotion. When principles are clear, Action follows without friction. Identity also protects focus from ego. When you are driven by the need to be seen, praised, or admired, your attention becomes externally oriented. You perform instead of practice. You seek outcomes instead of mastery. The Stoics warned that this dependence on external validation makes you fragile. Your focus rises and falls with applause or criticism. The disciplined individual grounds identity in character, not reputation. Character is always within your control. Reputation never is. Reflect on how often your attention is hijacked by concern for how you appear. You replay interactions, worry about impressions, imagine judgments. This mental activity feels important, but it produces nothing of value. The Stoics would call this wasted motion of the soul. When you commit to acting well rather than being seen as good, focus simplifies. Your task becomes execution, not performance. There is another dimension to identity that sharpens focus purpose. The Stoics believed that humans are made for contribution, for acting in accordance with reason and nature. When you lack purpose, distraction fills the vacuum. The mind seeks stimulation to replace meaning. When purpose is present, focus follows naturally. You do not need constant motivation to care about what matters. Discipline becomes an expression of alignment, not force. This does not require grand ambitions. The Stoics were suspicious of grandiosity. Purpose can be as simple as doing your work with excellence, speaking truthfully, acting justly, improving steadily. Focus grows when you treat small actions as expressions of a larger commitment to character. Each task becomes a chance to practice virtue. This transforms ordinary life into training. You may resist this because it sounds demanding. It is. Stoicism never promised comfort. It promised strength. But there is a paradox here. When you stop resisting the demands of your role and accept them fully, mental friction decreases. Focus becomes less effortful because you are no longer fighting yourself. Discipline is not constant tension, it is consistency. The Stoics also understood that identity must be renewed daily. You do not clarify your role once and for all. Each morning, Marcus Aurelius reminded himself of the kind of people he would encounter and the kind of person he intended to be. This ritual anchored his focus before the world could scatter it. Without such reminders, the mind defaults to habit, and habit is often undisciplined. As you move through your day, notice when focus fades. Ask not what distracted you, but which role you abandoned. Were you present as a listener, or already preparing a response? Were you working or seeking escape? This inquiry is not for self-criticism, but for correction. Awareness restores alignment. In the next part, we will confront one of the most difficult Stoic truths about focus, that comfort is often the enemy of discipline. You will see why the pursuit of ease weakens attention, and how deliberate discomfort trains the mind to remain steady under pressure. For now, hold this firmly. When you know who you are meant to be in a moment, focus stops being a struggle and becomes a natural consequence of clarity. Comfort feels harmless, even deserved, but the Stoics saw it as one of the most subtle threats to discipline and focus, not because comfort is evil, but because the constant pursuit of ease trains the mind to flee the moment resistance appears. Focus does not disappear suddenly. It erodes the moment discomfort is treated as a signal to stop, rather than a condition to endure. The Stoics understood that a mind conditioned only for comfort becomes fragile, easily distracted, easily defeated. Look closely at how distraction enters your life. It rarely announces itself as laziness. It arrives disguised as relief, a short break that becomes avoidance. A moment of rest that turns into escape. The Stoics would not condemn rest, but they would ask a sharper question: does this restore you, or does it weaken your capacity to stay with difficulty? Focus grows when you remain present even when the task feels heavy. Discipline is not cruelty toward yourself. It is loyalty to your long-term strength. Seneca warned that an overindulgent life dulls the mind. When everything is made easy, attention loses its edge. The Stoics practiced voluntary discomfort not because they romanticized suffering, but because they understood training. Just as the body strengthens under resistance, the mind sharpens under challenge. When you deliberately choose the harder option, when you stay with a task after the initial motivation fades, you teach your mind that discomfort is survivable. Focus deepens as fear of difficulty dissolves. Modern life offers endless escapes from discomfort, noise to avoid silence, entertainment to avoid effort, stimulation to avoid stillness. The Stoics would see this as a dangerous trade. You exchange short-term relief for long-term weakness. Each time you escape the moment your focus is tested, you reinforce the habit of avoidance. Over time, the mind becomes restless, unable to stay with anything demanding. Discipline is rebuilt by reversing this pattern one deliberate choice at a time. There is a quiet power in staying with the work when boredom sets in, staying with the conversation when it becomes uncomfortable, staying with your thoughts when they challenge you. The Stoics believed that this capacity to remain is a form of courage. Focus is courage applied inwardly. It is the refusal to abandon yourself at the first sign of friction. You may believe you need better conditions to focus, more time, less stress, more motivation. The Stoics would tell you this is an illusion. Conditions will never be perfect. Waiting for them is another form of avoidance. Discipline is forged in imperfect conditions. Focus strengthens precisely because the environment is not ideal. When you can remain steady amid distraction, you gain confidence that cannot be shaken by circumstance. This is why the Stoics emphasize training rather than theory. Reading about discipline does nothing unless it changes how you respond to discomfort. Each moment of resistance is an invitation. You can flee or you can train. You can numb yourself or you can strengthen yourself. Focus grows quietly through these choices, often unnoticed, until one day you realize that what once overwhelmed you now feels manageable. There is also a deeper truth here that many resist. Discomfort reveals what matters. When something is easy, it requires no commitment. When something is hard, staying with it becomes an act of meaning. The Stoics believed that virtue reveals itself under pressure. Focus, as a form of virtue, reveals itself when distraction is most tempting. This is where discipline becomes identity, not effort. As you listen, reflect on where you instinctively seek comfort, not as a judgment, but as information. The Stoics valued clarity over guilt. Where does your attention drift the moment resistance appears? Where do you negotiate with yourself to quit early? These are not failures, they are training signals. Awareness of them is already progress. In the next part, we will examine how time itself becomes an ally or an enemy of focus, depending on how you perceive it. You will see why the Stoics treated time with urgency but not anxiety, and how this perspective transforms discipline from pressure into purpose. For now, remember this. Every time you choose to stay when leaving would be easier, you are not just completing a task. You are rebuilding the kind of mind that cannot be easily broken.